Hare Krishna, welcome all, welcome back to our Bhakti Yoga journeys. And let's invite the new year. A warm greetings to all of you for this very, very wonderful new year. May you all have a very enlivening and enlightening new year ahead. And I thought let's have an interesting verse for our meditations today, because I'm sure you all started your new year with some new affirmations, some new resolutions. So today's verse will inspire us in a way that we will be able to find the perfection of all our resolutions. All right. So the verse that I chose for today's discussion, this is from the first canto, second chapter. If you remember, our past two discussions were also from the very same chapter, and we are continuing with this. In fact, this is like the conclusion of that whole chapter, this particular verse that we chose today, text number 28 and 29. So let me share it on my screen. Okay. So if you can see my screen, just give me a thumbs up. Okay, great. All right, so this is how the verse goes. Vasudeva paraveda, Vasudeva paramaka, Vasudeva parayoga, Vasudeva parakriya, Vasudeva parangyanam, Vasudeva param tapaha, Vasudeva paro dharmo, Vasudeva paragatihi. Very, very nice verse. So many times the name Vasudeva has come. In a sense, this verse is the invocation prayer in itself. Right? So this is how the translation goes. In the revealed scriptures, the ultimate object of knowledge is Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead. The purpose of performing sacrifice is to please him. Yoga is for realizing him. All fruitive activities are ultimately rewarded by him alone. He is supreme knowledge, and all severe austerities are performed to know him. Religion, dharma, is rendering loving service unto him. He is the supreme goal of life. So this verse, now you all might have chosen different kinds of resolutions. Some of you might have chosen to study the Vedas. Some of you might have chosen to render some kind of spiritual activity, some kind of a spiritual sacrifice. Some of you might have decided to intensify your personal practice of yoga, or go deep in your understanding of the world around you, refine your worldview through knowledge, or do some kind of austerities, or in general just live a very pious, spiritually minded, religious kind of life, right? No matter what destination you choose, gati, no matter what destination you choose, ultimately the highest aim you can aspire for is pleasing the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva. So this verse is like the culmination of all the teachings of this chapter. If you remember, in our previous discussions, we spoke about what is the highest dharma. We spoke about how all our activities have to ultimately culminate into increasing the dormant love of God that we all have within our heart. So continuing this same theme, Vyasa in this particular chapter, he highlights how no matter what resolution you take, your ultimate aim should be to please the Supreme Lord, right? So that is the theme you are seeing here. So let's see the purport. Very, very long, but very insightful purport. So please pay attention. So purport, that Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, is the only object of worship, is confirmed in these two shlokas. Right? So straight away, as we discussed in this chapter, and more so will come in our future discussions in Bhagavatam, how the lead up to this particular verse is how Vyasa writes, there different aspirants, different seekers may aspire to worship different forms of the absolute truth. But The progressively minded spiritualists, they like to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead as Sri Krishna, as Vasudeva, as Sri Krishna. Why? Because the highest aspiration that the soul can desire, in a sense, there are many, the finish line of spirituality is not just one point, but it's a whole spectrum, right? One can aspire to just to be spiritually minded, just be absorbed in the spirit. That's called as Brahma Bhuta state. Or one can aspire for transcending the three gunas, sattva, rajas, tamas, not influenced by material energy. That state is called mukti, liberation from the three gunas. Some people may aspire for realizing their true state as beyond this layers of the body, mind, intelligence, and ego. One wants to peel off all these layers and realize their true self as the spirit soul, as a Purusha, as Patanjali says, or as the self, the Atman, as the Vedanta says, right? One may aspire for that state of samadhi, right? But beyond all these are all points in the finish line. Nevertheless, these are all perfections of life. But if the soul wants to seek the highest perfection, it is to revive its dormant state of Sat, Chit and Ananda coming from that state of the soul's innate nature to love and be loved, and recognizing its dormant relationship with the Supreme Lord, and acting based on that relationship by realizing its true state, its real nature, the Swarupa as it is called. That is the highest aspiration that the soul can seek. And therefore, that particular state, that highest state, comes when the soul can realize its inherent relationship with the Supreme Lord, inherent loving relationship with the Supreme Lord, and act on that relationship. And that relationship is fulfilled when one experiences a beautiful reciprocation with the embodiment of that love. Or in other words, the highest understanding of the absolute truth that the soul can realize is the absolute truth as the form of reciprocator of love. And that particular form of the absolute truth, as who's the embodiment of all rasa, embodiment of loving devotional mellows, as the one who awards love as the highest benediction, is Sri Krishna. Not Narayan, who may be in the mood of awe and reverence, not Lord Shiva, who can award liberation, not any other devatas. In fact, just the verse before this, Vyasa writes, even though an advanced devotee respects all, they are not interested in these different forms of the devatas, because they are not aspiring for some material goal. Their aspiration is nothing short of the highest, which is the reviving the dormant love of the soul. And therefore, that form of the absolute truth, who completely reciprocates with the soul, is that embodiment of all attractiveness, which is Sri Krishna. The very word Krishna means all attractive. And therefore, Prabhupada begins the purport by explaining how Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, is the only object of worship. Right? And then he continues, in the Vedic literature, there is the same objective, establishing one's relationship and ultimately reviving our lost loving service unto him. Right? So realizing this relationship, in Sanskritam, the word for relationship is sambandha. Sambandha means relationship. So if you see, the entire Vedic teachings are mainly presenting three things. One thing in essence, but that one expanded into three. One, the science of relationship, which is called sambandha. Then how to further that relationship, how to deepen that relationship, which is called abhideya. And the third aspect is how to attain perfection, the consummation of that relationship, the perfection of that relationship, which is prayojana. The entire Vedas are basically talking about just these three things. And therefore, the essence of all Vedic teachings is to revive the soul's lost relationship with Krishna. That is the sum and substance of the Vedas. In the Bhagavad Gita, the same theory is confirmed by the Lord in his own words. The ultimate purpose of the Vedas is to know him alone. Vedesha sarver ahameva vedyo. The whole goal of Vedas is not to become a master of, oh, look, I have memorized all these shlokas. Look, I know the intricacies of all the different spiritual paths, right? It's like saying, I have mastered the entire map. I know every single detail in the map, but I never reached my destination, right? So the point of having a map is to reach the destination, not just memorizing the destination. So the goal of Vedas is not to just become an expert in all the knowledge and the wisdom, but the goal is to revive that relationship, knowing Krishna as that embodiment of absolute love. All the revealed scriptures are prepared by the Lord through his incarnation in the body of Srila Vyasadeva, just to remind the fallen souls, the conditioned by material nature, of Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead. So Krishna, he manifests himself as the literary incarnation, as Vyasa, just to guide the conditioned souls of this material world how to navigate through the miseries of this world and the challenges that this material world offers, how to navigate through this and ultimately reach the highest goal of reviving the relationship. Therefore, it's Vyasa's causeless mercy has presented all these Vedas, right? And the goal should not be forgotten. No demigod can award freedom from material bondage. That is the verdict of all Vedic literatures. Impersonalists who have no information of the personality of Godhead minimize the omnipotency of the Supreme Lord and put him on equal footing with all other living beings. And for this act, such impersonalists get freedom from material bondage only with great difficulty. They can surrender unto him only after many, many births in the culture of transcendental knowledge. So, if you are only a knowledge seeker, see, knowledge without understanding or without realizing the soul's inherent relationship is just a mere burden for in this material world. Because knowledge can also bind you to this world. This knowledge can also become a burden for the soul if the purpose of this knowledge is not attained. Therefore, Prabhupada here is warning that sometimes too much of knowledge can also distract a spiritualist. In fact, if you look at the world around you, if you look at the whole spiritual circuit around you, the greater damage to spirituality and authentic spirituality is done not by the ignorant people, but by the so-called wise spiritualists or knowledgeable spiritualists, because of the way they misinterpret the conclusion of the Vedas, the way they construe very abstract, irrelevant conclusions from the teachings of the Vedas. So we have to be mindful not to get carried away by this pursuit of knowledge. Knowledge is only useful as long as it helps us attain the ultimate goal of realizing Krishna, right? And Prabhupada specifically is talking here about the impersonalist philosophy, which tries to talk about how, in an absolute sense, yes, every soul is spiritual. Just as absolute truth is spiritual, every soul is spiritual. If you and I are Sachidananda, Krishna is also Sachidananda. Therefore, from that scale, everybody is equal. Everybody is equal is Sachidananda. But the level of Sachidananda-ness is different. In fact, the very same Vedas that talk about the oneness of all forms of life, it also talks about how, though all forms of lives are eternally liberated, there is one who is supremely liberated, and that one who is supremely liberated is maintaining all other living entities, indicating how there is the maintainer and the maintained. This relationship of dependence is always there. Therefore, such people who are lost in just intellectual pursuit of Vedic knowledge, will find it very, very difficult to surrender. And therefore, Prabhupada writes, only after many, many, many births, they may surrender by this process of just mere cultivation of knowledge, right? So, as therefore, we understand that the whole spirituality is about tuning your consciousness. But then one may raise an argument that, oh, if the entire Vedic spiritual path is about tuning your consciousness, then why are there so many rituals in the Vedas? Right? Because if you see, right from day one, we begin our spiritual pursuits. There is, you have to, there are rules and regulations. There are certain yamas, there are certain niyamas. This is how you have to do certain principles of etiquette, certain rituals you have to follow. Why are we doing all this then? Then Prabhupada explains this. One may argue that the Vedic activities are based on sacrificial ceremonies. There are so many yagyas. That is true. But all such sacrifices are also meant for realizing the truth about Vasudeva. Right? Another name for Vasudeva is Yagya. So if you see the way Prabhupada is slowly unpacking this verse, right? If I may just go back to the verse again, right? The verse talk about Vasudeva Paraveda, how understanding Vasudeva the highest goal of Vedas. Vasudeva Paramakha means he is the highest of the sacrifice. So Prabhupada is expanding the whole verse line by line, is unpacking it line by line. So we'll see the second aspect now, Paramakha, which means how all sacrifices are meant for realizing the truth about Vasudeva. Another name for Vasudeva is Yagya or sacrifice. And the Bhagavad Gita is clearly stated that all sacrifices and all activities are to be conducted for the satisfaction of Yagya or Vishnu, the personality of Godhead. So the whole point of following the Vedic rituals is to ultimately please the Lord. Right? Because at one level, the conditioned soul who is very much absorbed in material energy cannot tune their consciousness so easily, can only connect to exchange of material energy. So what happens in a yagya, in a sacrifice? What are you doing? All the hard-earned resources of nature, the grains, the ghee, the vegetables, the fruits, which they don't just come randomly, right? Some human effort has gone into, churning, collecting the milk and turning it into yogurt and then making it butter and then churning that butter and then converting into ghee. And now you're putting all that ghee into fire, right? So you are sacrificing some human energy. So for those who operate more at the level of exchange of material energy, yagya is the best way for them to connect to transcendence. And therefore, one needs to understand that the ultimate aim, Bhoktaram Yagya Tapasam Sarvaloka Maheshwaram, the ultimate aim of all the yagyas, the ultimate benefactor of all yagyas is the Supreme Lord Krishna. Therefore, even while performing Vedic rituals, the idea is to not just get absorbed in the form of the ritual, but to go deeper to the spirit of that ritual, which is how by sacrificing those hard-earned material energy in the form of the various ingredients that go in the yagya, by sacrificing them into the fire, we are offering our consciousness, tuning our consciousness to the Supreme. So therefore, there's nothing wrong in these Vedic rituals if we understand the purpose behind them, right? Then Vasudeva Para Yoga. How can as practitioners of yoga, how can we connect to Vasudeva? So Prabhupada writes, this is also the case with the yoga systems. Yoga means to get into touch with the Supreme Lord. This is the perhaps the most deepest level in which you can unpack the definition of yoga, right? We all know yoga means to connect. At one level, yoga means to connect to your true self. But then the self is not independent of the Supreme Lord. So from self-realization, we realize the absolute truth, right? And therefore, Prabhupada elsewhere in the Bhagavad Gita, he writes how self-realization and God realization are two sides of the same coin. Meaning you cannot have one without the other. you cannot fully realize Krishna without realizing yourself. And you cannot claim to have realized yourself without realizing Krishna. These two go hand in hand, right? Therefore, yoga means to get into touch with the Supreme Lord. The process, however, includes several bodily features such as asana, dhyana, pranayama, and meditation. And all of them are meant for concentrating upon the localized aspect of Vasudeva, represented as Paramatma, right? Paramatma realization is but partial realization of Vasudeva. If one is successful in the attempt, one realizes Vasudeva in full, right? So, as Patanjali also, he uses the word Ishvara, right? Ishvara Pranidhanatva. So, even in the Ashtanga Yoga system, the process becomes faster and easier, right? Because as Samadhi Siddhir Ishvara Pranidhanat, one can easily attain perfection in the process of attaining Samadhi through surrender to Ishvara Pranidhana. So, which means here specifically in the Ashtanga Yoga system, one tries to focus on the source of the consciousness from within, which is Paramatma, who is nothing but an expansion of Vasudeva. So, even as an Ashtanga Yogi, the goal is to finally tune yourself to Paramatma, to Vasudeva, to Krishna, right? But by ill luck, most yogis are stranded by the powers of mysticism achieved through this bodily process, right? Sometimes one may get enamored. You may be wondering, oh, this statement is not for me. I have not achieved any siddhis. I don't have the risk of this. But think about it. Even within that little advancement we all made, we have developed certain mastery over our mind and body. And it's very easy to get carried away by the sense of freedom that you will experience while practicing yoga. Because yoga is very liberating, where once your mind and body are in control, when they are in a balanced, grounded state, it becomes very addicting. Yoga can also be an addiction where you become so absorbed in the practice itself and not furthering the practice to realize the deeper goal. It is going back to our driving analogy, right? So through yoga, you will very nicely tune your body, the car, clean the car, tune the engine, fill the air, right? And you'll be so, you'll be relishing driving your car so much that forget the map, forget the destination. I just like to stroll around in my car all day around the city and do some sightseeing because it is so pleasurable to drive the car now, right? Earlier, when the car was miserable, you were desperate to reach the destination and get rid of the car. But now suddenly, by the practice of yoga, this car called as a body and mind becomes so well tuned, all the forgotten material desires will start coming up. Hey, my body and mind are so good now. Maybe I should enjoy those things which I gave up hope on. So this is also a kind of siddhi we need to be mindful of, right? We can easily get carried away by just the sheer goodness that we are experiencing in our life. Yoga brought a lot of goodness in our life, but we can get carried away by that, right? Therefore, Prabhupada is saying that such a person is an ill-luck yogi, right? Ill luck means how unfortunate they are. They have such a well-tuned car. All they need to do is just rush towards a destination. They have the best possible car compared to all the other fellow travelers. But instead of reaching the destination, they are busy strolling around the city, right? And what happens to such an ill-fated yogi? They are given a chance in the next birth by being placed in the families of good learned brahmanas or in the families of rich merchants in order to execute the unfinished task of Vasudeva realization, right? Even Patanjali talks about such a person. He calls them as bhava pratyayas or videhas, right? How these yogis who somehow miss their destination, they've already gone to deeper states of samadhi but still haven't achieved a state of nirbija samadhi. right? Such a person may be born in a higher dimension, may one of the higher lokas, and they may continue their yogic journey from there, or they may be born on earth as these very already involuted state of consciousness. So they are not at all worldly in that sense, and they continue their journey. Or similar explanation in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna calls as yoga brashtas. Those who have fallen away from the path of yoga, they will go to a higher planet, enjoy good life there, again come back, or sometimes born in this life in a very spiritually conducive environment. You may be wondering why Prabhupada is talking about families of rich merchants. What does wealth got to do with yoga? You may be wondering. It's just that when you're born in a more comfortable setting, privileged setting, then it's easy for you to focus on your spirituality than worrying about your daily requirements. So that way, a good material opportunity is provided to fulfill your incomplete spiritual journey. If such fortunate brahmanas and sons of rich men properly utilize the chance, they can easily realize Vasudeva by good association with saintly persons. Unfortunately, such preferred persons are captivated again by material wealth and honor, and thus they practically forget the aim of life. So this is also a danger we may have, right? First of all, we should not delay it till our next life. And even in this life, we should not get carried away by this goodness that we are experiencing in yoga. But again, go back. That's why it is always good to remind yourself of how you started your journey, right? I'm sure we all had some challenges, struggles that inspired us to seek solutions in the path of yoga and spirituality. We should always remind ourselves of those and not get carried away by the temporary relief that we have experienced through our practice of spirituality, right? Then likewise, Prabhupada continues, this is also for the culture of knowledge, Vasudeva Paragyana. According to Bhagavad Gita, there are 18 items in culturing knowledge. By such culture of knowledge, one becomes gradually prideless, devoid of vanity, non-violent, forbearing, simple, devoted to a great spiritual master, and self-controlled. By culture of knowledge, one becomes unattached to hearth and home and becomes conscious of the miseries due to death, birth, old age, and disease. And all culture of knowledge culminates in devotional service to the personality of Godhead Vasudeva. Right? So this is, Prabhupada is literally translating the symptoms of knowledge, or the definition of jnana as given in the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, right? 13.8 onwards, right? So basically, knowledge ultimately culminates into blossoming of certain virtues within us. Virtues like pridelessness, non-violence, forbearance, simplicity, self-control, right? It's not an intellectual pursuit, but rather swadhyaya, as we so many times discussed. It's about studying the self. You are trying to refine yourself through knowledge, right? And once you cultivate these virtues, the fulfillment of all these virtues come when we engage these virtues in devotional service, right? So what does the soul benefit in being known as a good person in this world, right? Worldly goodness may give you certain worldly credit, but it does no good to the soul. Ultimately, all the good qualities of this world, they will achieve their perfection when one realizes the devotional aspect, the devotional service to personality of Godhead Vasudeva, right? So that's why many times, I'm sure you might have encountered people who may not be practicing spirituality very actively, but may have some very, very wonderful qualities, right? So it's very good that they have these beautiful qualities, all these virtues like pridelessness, non-violence, simplicity, right? But those virtues will really attain their perfection only when it inspires them to engage them in their spiritual practice and realize the devotional science. Otherwise, even these good virtues also will ultimately become a burden for the soul, just like the knowledge that we discussed earlier. Therefore, Vasudeva is the ultimate aim in culturing all different branches of knowledge. Culture of knowledge leading one to the transcendental plane of meeting Vasudeva is real knowledge. Physical knowledge in its various branches is condemned in the Bhagavad Gita as ajnana, or the opposite of real knowledge. The ultimate aim of physical knowledge is to satisfy the sense, which means prolongation of the term of material existence and thereby continuation of the threefold miseries. If you just look at the world around you, all the pursuit of knowledge is mainly geared towards how to improve the quality of your life. And forget about, what are the worldly knowledge. Unfortunately, even in the world of spirituality, right, 90% of the Instagram spirituality is about how to enhance the quality of your life in this world. Good, we need good quality of life, no doubt about that, but we need the good quality life is only a foundation to transcend this world. If that goal is not clear, then you are just only furthering this whole cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease, right? So any kind of knowledge, even the quote unquote spiritual knowledge, we're not just condemning math, science, and physics and economics to that category. Even the spiritual knowledge, sometimes even people may study the Bhagavad Gita just to find some tips for finding better ways to manage their organization, right? Or some better tips to find some financial tips. I remember many years ago, I think it was like maybe even 20 years ago, I remember I was sometime in college, and I remember reading an article about how a retired military general wrote a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita explaining how it is actually a military strategy book, right? I mean, see, that's the nature of spiritual knowledge. At one level, we can appreciate how many facets Bhagavad Gita can have, and so many lessons can be derived out of Bhagavad Gita. But ultimately, the highest lesson, if you forget, right, then you are cheating yourself. Forget others, you are cheating yourself and depriving yourself of the ultimate purpose of studying spiritual books, right? So prolonging the miserable life of material existence is nishines or avidya, but the same physical knowledge leading to the way of spiritual understanding helps one to end the miserable life of physical existence and to begin the life of spiritual existence on the plane of Vasudeva, right? Even Prabhupada, one time he explained how even an open-minded academic scientist, if they are open-minded, they will realize Vasudeva someday, right? Because if you look at many times we think, oh, the modern science and technology people, they are non-theistic, but it is not so. Across the world, a lot of people who have pursued science, especially the physical sciences, they are amazed by the wonder of this creation. And anybody who studies nature, anybody who studies the way this universe functions, they cannot but amaze that is there some intelligence behind all this. So this is the natural conclusion. So it doesn't matter whether you are pursuing mathematics or economics or science or Bhagavad Gita. If you are an open-minded seeker, you will come to the conclusion of realizing Vasudeva. It is just that through those other sciences, it may take many lifetimes. It's just that, spirituality is a more direct path of realizing the absolute truth, right? But nevertheless, if you are not realizing that ultimate aim, then all this knowledge is going to be useless. The same applies to all kinds of austerities. Tapasya means voluntary acceptance of bodily pains to achieve some higher end of life. So achieving higher end of life is very important, right? So you can taking up to this what is that ice bucket challenge, right? Or whatever, all kind of 21-day fasting challenge. There are all kinds of tapasya that people are trying to do today, right? It's good. It's pushing the limits of your comfort zone. It may help you to go deeper. But if the higher end of life, if the higher goal is missing, this tapasya, at the end of the tapasya, you will just feel more hollow. Right? In fact, when the higher end is missing, think about it. When the higher end is missing, suddenly people, let's say you take up this intense austerity, let's say something like climbing Mount Everest, right? And for 1 year, maybe 2 years, you're preparing your body, your lung capacity, your muscle strength. For 2 years, you are, with this sole one pointed aim, you're tuning your body and your prana for this. And then finally, you will go to the base camp. You'll spend some time there, condition your body. You spend 1 whole month there. And then finally, the day comes when you start climbing, and probably in 1 month, you climb the Himalayas. You have achieved it also. And then you come back down. And then you're wondering, what now? So the entire motivation I had for 2 years was to achieve some kind of a goal, but then now it's over, right? So if the goal of tapasya is the tapasya itself, then you are in for a big shock once it's over. Right? So the goal of tapasya is not just the austerity in itself. It's not some kind of an ego challenge that we are giving ourselves. It is a means to a higher end. So when that higher end is missing, even the tapasya will make you hollow at the end of it. And Prabhupada gives examples of such people. Ravana and Hiranyakashipu underwent severe type of bodily torture to achieve the end of sense gratification. Right? And what end did they get? They did not feel satisfied. Right? Can you imagine? Hiranyakashipu and Ravana, they mastered the highest, even no modern day yogi can match the kind of siddhis that they have achieved. But finally, they could not control their own senses. Right? So, even a slightly off topic, but somebody sent me a meme of this is a very Indian example. Those of you follow Indian sport cricket, you will relate with this example. So there's a very, very famous Indian cricketer who is known for his fitness, and a couple of years ago he turned vegan, and off late he has been having some struggles in terms of he's always drawn into a particular kind of play in the game, and he keeps getting himself out of the game. So he could not resist the temptation of just hitting that ball in a particular way. So this meme was showing that how if this guy can give up the temptation of meat and eggs and bacon, why can't he give up the temptation of hitting the ball in that one direction? Why can't he just resist? So you can see he's known to be like one of the fittest sports people in India, and known for his austerity. But what use is all that austerity and self-control when it is not helping him in his own game, right? So because if the end is not there, merely having some kind of austerity is only going to give you some ego boost, right? Sometimes modern politicians and sportsmen also undergo severe types of austerities to achieve some political end. This is not actual tapasya. One should accept voluntary bodily inconvenience for the sake of knowing Vasudeva, because that is the way of real austerities. Otherwise, all forms of austerities are classified as modes of passion and ignorance. Right? It is pure Rajogun which is driving that kind of austerity. So even when I'm sure many of you would have taken some austerities of, something to do with your food intake, something to do with some kind of physical strength that you want to achieve in this, or maybe more lung capacity that you want to achieve this with nice intense pranayama this whole year, right? But if that austerities if you're not connecting that austerity to a spiritual goal of deepening your consciousness, right, of connecting to Vasudeva, to Krishna, then it'll end up increasing the rajas and tamas within us. How will it increase the rajas? It will increase that sense of, yes, I am the doer mentality. And as soon as that rajas comes, rajas is always followed by tamas. The moment you are overcome by this mode of passion, you will act in aggression, and then you will break down and you will need some rest. That is tamas, right? So you'll immediately go into a state of inactivity. So don't let your austerities push you towards the side of rajas and tamas. And it could be anything. It could be some kind of a work goal that you may be having, certain life goals, certain family goals, certain academic goals, right? Whatever pursuits that you have, if you are not connecting them to a higher aim, a higher goal of life, then it will only end up increasing the rajas and tamas within us. Passion and ignorance cannot end the miseries of life. Only mode of goodness can mitigate the threefold miseries of life. Vasudeva and Devaki, the so-called father and mother of Lord Krishna, underwent penances to get Vasudeva as their son. Lord Sri Krishna is the father of all living beings. Therefore, he is the original living being of all other living beings. He is the original eternal enjoyer among all other enjoyers. Therefore, no one can be his begetting father, as the ignorant may think. Lord Sri Krishna agreed to become the son of Vasudeva and Devaki upon being pleased by their severe austerities. Therefore, if any austerity has to be done, they must be done to achieve the end of knowledge, Vasudeva. So Prabhupada is quoting the example of Vasudeva and Devaki here as a contrast with Ravana and Hiranyakashipu. If you see in terms of the quantum of austerity performed, it may be same. But the purpose of Ravana and Hiranyakashipu was to enhance their sense gratification. But the purpose of Vasudeva and Devaki was to serve the Supreme Lord. Right? So this should be the motivation. Right? Therefore, if any austerity have to be done, they must be done to achieve the end of knowledge, Vasudeva. Vasudeva is the original personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. As explained before, the original personality of Godhead expands himself by innumerable forms. Such expansion of forms is made possible by his various energies. His energies are also multifarious, and his internal energies are superior and external energies inferior in quality. They are explained in Bhagavad Gita 7:4-6 as the para and apara prakriti. So his expansions of various forms which take place via the internal energies are superior forms, whereas the expansions that take place via the external energies are inferior forms. So this we studied in our Bhagavad Gita, how, right, Krishna talks about earth, water, fire, air, ether, how these are the, and of course, the mind, intelligence, and ego. These are the 8 separated energies or the inferior external energies, material energies, right? Then there is the living entity, who is the superior energy because is direct spiritual energy of the Lord. And there is more the internal energy, the Antaranga Shaktis, all this, the concerts of the Lord, the entire spiritual world, all this, the core spiritual energies come under that category, right? So even between this para and apara energies of the Lord, the para prakritis, which are beyond this material energy, they are to be seen as superior. The living entities are also his expansions. The living entities who are expanded by his internal potency are eternally liberated persons, whereas those who are expanded in terms of material energies are externally conditioned souls. So again, among the living entities, there are broadly 2 categories, right? Where there are those who are eternal associates of the Lord, like when the Lord descends as his avatar, he brings along with him all his associates, right? All these advanced, the great souls, his expansions, they all come in this particular category. All the residents of Vrindavan, they all come in this category. Then we also have those who are conditioned, like you and I. Though we are the superior spiritual energy, nevertheless, we are still conditioned by material energy. Therefore, we come in that particular category. Therefore, All culture of knowledge, austerities, sacrifice, and activities should be aimed at changing the quality of the influence that is acting upon us. For the present, we are all being controlled by the external energy of the Lord, and just to change the quality of that influence, we must endeavor to cultivate spiritual energy. So, after having described the problem, how through Vedic study, through knowledge, through austerities, through yoga, how we may be misled. Now, Prabhupada, in this part of the purport, he is explaining the solution. The solution is we must learn to transfer our control from external energy to the internal energy. Right now, we are controlled by material energy. We must allow ourselves to come under the influence of the spiritual internal energy, right? And just to change the quality of the influence, we must endeavor to cultivate spiritual energy. In the Bhagavad Gita, it is said that those who are Mahatmas, or those whose minds have been broadened as to be engaged in the service of the Lord Krishna, are under the influence of the internal potency. And that effect is that such broad-minded living beings are constantly engaged in the service of the Lord without any deviation. That should be the aim of life, right? Undeviated engagement in devotional service, this should be the aim of life. Meaning, no matter what, see, mind you, this is also a very important point. After having read all those, it is not that Veda, Jnana, Yoga, Tapa, it's not that they lose their value. All of these are different modalities to attain the absolute truth. So Vyasa in this verse, he is not discarding them, but explaining what is the right way of doing. Now, each of us, we may be wired differently and tuned to be inclined to one of those activities. Some of you may be inclined to study of Vedas. Some of you may be inclined to some kind of a work. Some of you may be inclined to austerity. Some of you may be inclined to practice of yoga, right? So it doesn't, you don't have to change your approach towards the absolute truth, but you need to change the purpose of why you are engaging in those activities. And that aim should be constant service of the Lord without deviation. That should be the aim of life. And that is the verdict of all the Vedic literatures. No one should bother himself with fruitive activities or dry speculation about transcendental knowledge. Everyone should at once engage himself in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Nor should one worship different demigods who work as different hands of the Lord for creation, maintenance, or destruction of the material world. There are innumerable powerful demigods who look over the external management of the material world. They are all different assisting hands of Lord Vasudeva. Even Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma are included in the list of demigods. But Lord Vishnu or Vasudeva is always transcendentally situated. Right? So even among in the Vedic understanding, how it is described that one absolute truth expands into multiple forms, right? Polymorphic monotheism. There is this one absolute truth, but expands into polymorpha, into different forms for the sake of creation, maintenance, and destruction of this world. So one must not get confused, or one must not even try, because it's easier to approach a particular devata. One is not tempted by that, but rather one is always very focused about connection to Supreme Lord Krishna or Vasudeva. Even though he accepts the quality of goodness of the material world, he is still transcendental to all the material bodies. The following example will clear the matter more explicitly. Right? In the prison house, there are the prisoners and the managers of the prison house. Both the managers and the prisoners are bound by the laws of the king. But even though the king sometimes comes into the prison, he is not bound by the laws of the prison house. The king is therefore always transcendental to the laws of the prison house, as the Lord is always transcendental to the laws of material world. Beautiful example here, explaining this polymorphic monotheism, right? So all are humans. King is also human. the managers, the warden and the police, all the jailers in the prison house, they are also humans. The prisoners are also humans, but each of them are operated by different levels of freedom. The prisoner is bound by the laws of the prison, so the jiva is bound by the laws of this material energy. And then there are the managers of the prison house, the administrators of this universe, who are the devatas, right? Who are relatively more free, but nevertheless they are not absolutely free. And then there is the king, Vasudeva. So even though the king sometimes enters in the prison house, even though the Lord appears as his different avatars, as his direct avatars, right? He is not bound by this world, right? So therefore one cannot compare the king and the guards and the other administration of the prison house to be at the same level, right? So that is the understanding here. Therefore, the essence of this entire chapter, in fact, this is such a beautiful chapter. As I mentioned last time also, if you get time, please read all the purports of this chapter, the first canto, second chapter. Very beautifully, the importance of devotional services is highlighted. And specifically Vyasa, in this particular verse, he makes it very, very clear that no matter what is your path, no matter what is your modality of operation, right? If it is Veda, then Vasudeva Paraveda, right? If it is performing sacrifice, then Vasudeva Paramakha. If it is yoga, Vasudeva Para Yoga. If it is activities, Vasudeva Parakriya. If it is knowledge, Vasudeva Parangyanam. If it is tapa, Vasudeva Para Tapa, austerities. If it is just following religiously minded life, then Vasudeva Paro Dharma, because Vasudeva Paragati, he is the ultimate destination, the goal of life, right? So this can be a beautiful meditation for us. We're starting this new year, and if we make this Vasudeva Paragati, ultimately the ultimate aim, ultimate destination with all my activities, I don't have to change my activities. I just have to keep this anchor in my mind that ultimately all my activities should lead to enhancement of my consciousness and deepening my relationship with the Lord, softening my heart, enhancing the loving relationship, loving feelings towards the Lord and his devotees, right? And that should be the aim of our practice. All right. So let me stop here and let's open the forum for any quick questions or comments if anybody has. If you like.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, I have one question.
Yes, Apurva, go ahead.
You mentioned that whatever modality we follow, we must remember our purpose, that is Krishna. But sometimes the person does a particular activity for Krishna, but in the process might forget the purpose. Like someone might take part in kirtan, but might get carried away by the musical aspect of kirtan and might not focus on Krishna. It happens a lot with me. So how does the process of kirtan purify us, that we eventually start thinking of Krishna, or do we have to remind ourselves again and again that
that is why we are called sadhakas or beginners. The difference between a sadhaka and a sadhya, for us, we remind ourselves to remember Krishna, whereas a perfected devotee, their consciousness naturally flows towards Krishna. So we have to keep reminding ourselves. That's the practice, that's the sadhana, right? So why are we chanting japa? Why are we chanting, participating in kirtan? So that we can remember Krishna, right? For an advanced soul, their mind is naturally flowing towards Krishna. In fact, for them, all these other things that we listed today can sometimes even become a distraction. But for us, we need some modality to remember Krishna, and even engaging in that activity, we need to keep remind ourselves. So look at it this way: during our japa, for our 2 hours of meditation, even for 1 minute, if you're able to remember Krishna, that's good. Because tomorrow, maybe not tomorrow, next month you can aspire for 2 minutes or improve it to 2 minutes. And the month after that, you can make it 3 minutes, right? And in no time, you'll be meditating. In 1 year, you'll have 12 minutes of remembrance of Krishna. Can you imagine what it feels like? Right? Even after years of practice, to me, it sounds like a dream come true. 12 minutes, I was able to focus on Krishna today on japa. 12 seconds, we become thrilled, right? So it's a practice. It's a practice. We have to consciously remind ourselves, right? Yeah. Anybody else? Any other questions or comments in the chat box?
Hare Krishna, Nimai, this is Medina speaking here. Can you hear me?
Yes, Medina, please go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time, as always. And you mentioned something about worshipping of other deities, such as Lord Shiva, and that worshipping them is not useless, but it's you're kind of not going in the correct path. But at the same time, there are so many people who dearly love Lord Shiva and they worship him, and even Lord Narayana, Lord Ganesha. So by worshiping them, are we deviating from the ultimate path, ultimate goal, or is it all going to lead us towards the the ultimate goal in some way or the other?
Okay. So there are two kinds of such worshippers of devatas. One
Mhm.
who is interested in the devata. Second, who is interested in the benediction that the devata can give. For example,
Mhm.
Lord Shiva can award liberation. He can
Mhm.
easily provide mukti from this material world. And many devotees of Lord Shiva, they are aspiring for this energy of Lord Shiva, this blessing of Lord Shiva, which can immediately remove them from this material energy and provide. That's why,
Mhm.
the Mahamrityunjaya mantra,
Mhm.
Urvakamiva, like a little
Mhm.
squash hanging from, I can, please liberate me with that
Mhm.
ease. That's the meaning of
Mhm.
the prayer, right? So when one is aspiring for just liberation, that way they are limiting their full potential. That is
Mhm.
the incorrect, or should I say, the injustice they are doing to the capacity of the soul. But there are the other kind of worshippers who just love Lord Shiva for who he is.
Yeah, and in this case, I've also read that, Lord Shiva is also one of the devotees of Lord Krishna. So, and Lord Krishna is very much pleased when you're not just worshiping him, but you're worshiping his devotees. So, when you're doing that in that mode, what are your thoughts on this?
Absolutely perfect. So such people, they are not looking at these devatas as somebody who has all these powers to award certain favorable benedictions, but rather they
Mm-hmm.
are seeing them as, oh, here these are advanced souls. And just like how we worship advanced devotees, senior devotees, we want to connect to them. That is the mood
Mm-hmm.
of such worshippers. So for such people,
Mm-hmm.
Lord Shiva, Vaishwananam
Mm-hmm.
Yatha Shambhu. Bhagavatam itself says the highest Vaishnava is Lord Shiva. So Lord Shiva will award you love for the Supreme Lord, love for Krishna. In fact, in the Bhagavatam itself, there are so many such episodes where
Mm-hmm.
Shiva, he guides the Prachetas. We will, in the course of our discussion, someday we'll enter Canto 4, maybe few
Mm-hmm.
years from now, I don't know when, right? And we'll go through that whole narration. He provides this beautiful Rudra Gita, song of Lord Shiva. We have Bhagavad Gita,
Mm-hmm.
there's also Rudra Gita. So we will discuss that also. So yes, Lord Shiva, all Devi, Ganesha, these are all Param Vaishnavas, right? Look
Mm-hmm.
at it this way. Like sometimes, okay, you may approach somebody from GV, let's say any of the teachers in our Golden School of Yoga, for the teachings
Mm-hmm.
that they offer, or you may say, oh, these guys live in GV, so which means they have good connections with the guest department. So maybe during the busy seasons, I'll easily get accommodation in GV if I get connected to them. You know, so this is the two kinds of connections, right? So even when you approach devatas for the role that they are playing, benedictions and they offer, that is an incomplete form of worship. Whereas when you approach
Mm-hmm.
devatas for who they are, then
Mm-hmm.
naturally, the Lord. And if you look at it, there are so many such case studies. Tulsi Das, the famous devotee of Lord
Mm-hmm.
Shiva who compiled the
Mm-hmm.
Ramcharitmanas, is a great devotee of Lord Shiva. In all
Mm-hmm.
his prayers and songs, he offers prayers to Lord Shiva also, right? Because he
Mm-hmm.
was guided him towards Lord Shiva, right? In fact, in Kashi, in Varanasi, it is said that anybody who leaves their body, who dies in Varanasi, he said that Lord Shiva personally comes and chants the holy name of Lord Ram in their ears.
Oh,
Yeah. So this is the
it's a
understanding.
beautiful love story.
Yes, it is like that. So, so we need to approach these devatas as Vaishnavas and not just for their role and their administrative powers.
Yeah, it has to be done with love, basically, not with the, with the exchange kind, unconditional love, not with expectation of something.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. I think we are almost out of time. If there are no other questions, let's end here. And yeah, we'll continue this discussion format. I hope you got it by now. I'm picking some key verses from Bhagavatam as we go through from the first canto onwards. So next time I'll pick a very interesting verse from chapter number 3, and we'll have some illuminations on that. All right. Thank you all so much. See you all next week again. So starting this new year, we'll be having our weekly satsangs. So next Wednesday, I will see you all with next discussion on Canto 1, chapter number 3. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.